On Proverbs 10 to 31. Tonight we're going to be talking about economics in the book of Proverbs. But before we do that, I'll lead us in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we're thankful for this day. We're thankful for this midweek opportunity to study your word. Please help us to do so with humility, but also keen to understand what you would have us to know. Thankful for Jesus. Please help us be like him. In his name we pray. Amen. So, I wanted to remind you at the beginning here of something that might be kind of easy to forget, since we are sort of heavily involved in this study of Proverbs, is that we still have two books to study in this overall study of the wisdom literature. And those books are Job and Ecclesiastes. And so we are going to stick in Proverbs for a couple more classes or so, and then we'll move to the book of Job and have plenty of opportunities to talk about that book, but of course not enough opportunities because we could spend the entire quarter or more just on Job. And so I want to remind you of why those three books, because the title of the class is Wisdom Literature, but why those three? Why not all of them? And remember, it's because these three books are in conversation with each other. Some of the things we've said about Proverbs really don't relate to that, but some of the things we're going to talk about tonight do. And so I want us to pay particular attention to those issues, because they will come up again, and we will see how Job and Ecclesiastes address those specific issues that will come up today. So be thinking about that, especially in the class tonight. So Proverbs has much to say about economics, and that's not surprising at all. Because, of course, we're all concerned about economics in some way or another. Some of us maybe more so than others. Some of us are forced to think about it more so than others, and you can take that to mean whatever. But that's just reality. To get along in the world, it is a factor. It is a major factor. And we shouldn't ignore that. But of course we know, and the book of Proverbs will point out, it's not the most important thing. In fact, that's going to be the last subtopic that we'll study tonight, if we get there. I think we will, but who knows. Other topics, however, that we will get to. First, the righteous are blessed with wealth. That's the point that relates to, in particular, to Job and Proverbs. It's a more general point than that, but it's a point that cannot be denied. Proverbs teaches that the righteous are blessed with wealth. That's not all it has to say on the subject, but we can't deny that, as we'll see. Secondly, foolish behavior, on the other hand, is punished with poverty. Those that are righteous are blessed with wealth. Those that are foolish are punished with poverty. But, sort of as a corrective to the idea, because if we just had those first 2 points up there, and if Proverbs only talked about those first 2 points, someone might conclude that this is almost like a health and wealth gospel kind of thing. But Proverbs is more sophisticated than that, of course. And so Proverbs understands that some people can get wealth by dishonest means, and that kind of wealth is not going to last. That's the third point, and then the fourth one I've already mentioned. One other thing about this issue of money, particularly in ancient Israel, I want you to remember this, that coins, the currency that we typically think about, and of course that's changed just in the last few years, the last few decades maybe, that even that has changed. If you think about for thousands of years, pretty much, financial transactions are dictated by paper money or much more ancient coins, right? So we have a plethora of coins from antiquity because that's what people used to buy things. But it wasn't that way in the early part of the Old Testament, even most of the time of the Old Testament narrative. Coins are after that. So before that, when you're talking about somebody being wealthy, you're talking about somebody who had land, who had flocks and herds, but who would also have other goods that could be measured and purchased or sold, usually by weight. And again, coinage is a later phenomenon with respect to ancient Israel, first attested by the Persians. So that gives you some idea about how late it is. Okay? So when Proverbs talks about wealth, it doesn't mean how much money you have in your bank account. That's what we think. That's not how it would have been thought about in ancient Israel. I think that's important to remember. Obviously, you don't necessarily have to know that for application purposes, but some of the verses may make a little more sense with those ideas in mind. Okay? So now let's look at this first theme, and that is the righteous are blessed with wealth. And before we read these verses, one more thing I want to mention about this. Some have argued that Proverbs pays an unfair amount, a disproportionate amount of attention to the rich as opposed to the poor. In other words, it's much more concerned about the rich and how they're characterized than it is with the poor. And again, this is because we as human beings are interested in economics, but we're also interested in how economic classes are portrayed in texts, and of course in this case an ancient text, and of course in this case a very important ancient text. For many people like us, the most important ancient text. But let's see if that's true. Let's just think about that as a possibility. Does Proverbs pay more attention, a disproportionate amount of attention to the rich, to the wealthy, than it does to the poor? Obviously, if I'm asking the question in that way, you already know the answer is no, but it is worth thinking about. Okay, the righteous are blessed with wealth. Proverbs 3, we have pretty much moved past Proverbs 1 to 9, but Proverbs 3, 9, and 10 is so clear about this issue, I think we need to begin with it. Honor the Lord with your substance and with the first fruits of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will be bursting with wine. Now again, remember the idea that the Proverbs aren't 100% true in every single situation. Now see, if it is, then what is the implication of 3 and 9 and 10 if I'm struggling financially? You're not righteous. You know what? A lot of people fall for that. That's precisely the kind of theology that Job's 3 friends want to convince Job of, and Job knows it. So already we can see the connection between the two books. Job knows that's not the case. And as I'm arguing, or as I will argue, it's more complicated than that in Proverbs. What Job's 3 friends do is they misread this theology as absolute. The very thing that I've been trying to convince you isn't the case. They think it's absolute. You follow God, you will have not enough to get by with. That's not what verse 10 says. Verse 10 says you're going to be filled with plenty. Now, of course, we also know, very much unfortunately, that today people take advantage of this as well. How often have we maybe not heard ourselves, maybe we have, about evangelists who capitalize on this kind of thinking? You will be blessed if you're righteous. And by the way, being righteous means giving money to my ministry, right? I mean, how many times have we heard that? I mean, That's also based on a misunderstanding of this idea, as if it were absolute. Proverbs 10:22, the blessing of the Lord makes rich, and he adds no sorrow with it. Okay? Now again, yeah, go ahead.
If it were absolute, how would you justify God letting the righteous be punished and murdered?
Right. Well, or losing family, losing wealth, losing reputation, which is exactly what happens in Job. That's the exact problem. And of course, Jesus addresses the problem himself. He says misfortune comes upon the righteous and unrighteous. He explicitly addresses that issue. So yeah, we know better, but Job's three friends didn't. And we'll get into how that thinking, not necessarily about money, but about other things, can impact people today. There's an example I want to use that where I came into direct contact with someone who was misled by this very way of thinking. You know what? I'll go ahead and give the illustration, because some of you may forget, and I may forget and tell it again, and so hopefully we can all get it together. So, but again, we're talking about riches here, but the overall theological position is, if I serve God, I'm going to be blessed. If I don't serve God, I'm going to be punished. There was an older guy where I preached several years ago who had tremendous amount of health difficulties, in and out of the hospital. It was just a very difficult situation. Well, but right before he passed away, when he was very, very ill, his wife asked me a question. She said, the other day, he was lamenting the fact that he's been going to services his entire life. He's been praying his entire life. He's been reading his Bible his entire life. And this is how God's going to repay him at the end of his life? Why did he think that? The very topic we're discussing is why. And you know, for somebody in my situation, where I'm not in his situation, it's easy for me to say, well, that's just a misunderstanding. But I haven't been in his situation yet. I hope, I think that I won't come to the same conclusion because we're talking about this. And I've thought enough about it, and I've heard enough about it, and I've taught enough about it, that hopefully, when it's my time, if that's the way my life shall end, I won't have the same problem. It's a terribly sad way to spend your final weeks on this earth, being misled by this type of thinking. And again, Job answers the question so powerfully, but unexpectedly, which we'll, of course, get into much later. Yeah.
I think it's important that we get in a frame of mind that God blesses us, but He also blesses the unrighteous.
Right.
All right?
Yep.
There's unrighteous that are rich. There are unrighteous that are healthy.
Yep.
All right? We've got to come to the realization that, as we said earlier, the riches are not important.
Right.
They're not. I mean, you can't, thankfully, you can't take them to heaven. All right? And we're all just like the unrighteous. We're going to die.
Right.
It's just a mortal fact.
Yep.
And it's not because God doesn't love you. It's not because you didn't do something right. It's just a fact of our mortality. And you're blessed in so many ways, even though it may not be riches. It's spiritual. You have a chance for immortality.
Right.
And it's not a physical immortality.
Right.
And that's hard for a physical person to grasp because most people don't understand the spirit.
Right. And I would say that it's probably most difficult when you're experiencing the finality of your physical life, right? That may be.
I haven't been there yet.
Right. Well, I wasn't saying you are. I wasn't saying you are, but I would assume maybe in that position, if I get there, and that's the way it ends for me, that hopefully I will have the attitude more of what you said rather than this misunderstanding. And again, it's not what's happening in Job and Ecclesiastes in connection with Proverbs is it's not correcting Proverbs. It's correcting a potential misunderstanding of Proverbs, but Proverbs itself makes the statement that riches aren't always the product of righteousness. You can gain riches through dishonesty, as we will see. So even within Proverbs, it's much less simplistic than this. All right, let's continue on. Proverbs 10:15. The wealth of the rich is their fortress. The poverty of the poor is their ruin. Is this a positive statement about riches? Now again, look at the parallelism.
Yes, it is a positive that riches give power and poverty takes away power.
Okay, is that true? It is. Ultimately, riches don't matter. But in the physical life, do they matter? They do. People have said, well, riches, money can't buy happiness. Yeah, they kind of can.
But what did Jesus tell the rich young man who wanted to follow? Go ahead and give all your riches to
Right.
the poor and follow me. So he made the big exclamation point. Riches are not the priority you ought to have.
Right.
And if you're going to follow me, don't put your faith in riches, put your faith in me.
And that's true. And of course, again, we're going to correlate with that point. But that's not the same thing as saying riches don't matter. That's what we sometimes want to get across. But that's just not the reality. The reality is they are important. They're not the most important. But as I said, can they buy happiness? Yeah, they can. I'm sorry, it can. Can it buy ultimate spiritual happiness? No. Can it buy happiness in comparison to maybe families? Not necessarily, but I still think it can. It can. And I'm not saying, you go buy a shiny new car or motorcycle or something, and that's what I'm saying. Although those things I've heard can make people happy, but what about experiences? Can you buy experiences? And I'm talking about experiences with family. I'm not talking about something you do by yourself, but can you buy experiences that you'll take with you the rest of your years? The fact is you can. That's important. Yeah.
You've got to keep this perspective that happiness varies from one person to another, and they may not be happy in your happiness. In other words, what makes me happy. The guy, Howard Hughes, he was real happy at the time he died, wasn't he?
Who is that?
You
What?
don't know who Howard Hughes was?
Howard Hughes?
He was the most richest man in the world at the time he died.
Never heard of him.
He basically died miserable.
Okay. I'm not doubting that point.
He was rich beyond your measure.
I'm not doubting that point. I'm just saying we can't deny its importance. That's all I'm saying.
Important, yes, but I don't know if it can buy happiness.
Okay.
I don't think it can.
Okay. Well, we can disagree about that. I think it can. All right? Yeah.
Try another word.
Okay.
Riches can buy pleasure.
Okay. All right. Pleasures that make you happy. But no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. We can go with that. Yeah, they can. right? I think we would agree with that. And so I think that's what, this is about this verse. I think that's what this verse is about, essentially. I think it is a positive statement. The first one's positive about wealth, but the second one is about poverty. Poverty of the poor is their ruin. And again, we're not talking about, this is, anytime you talk about economics, it's so difficult because we as a society are so ridiculously wealthy. When you're talking about wealth and poverty in ancient Israel, do you think it compares to wealth and poverty today? No, I mean, it's not even close. This is the way I've always thought about when you read passages about wealth in the Bible. Let's talk about somebody else. Let's talk about the guy that's got a mansion, 5-car garage, whatever. That's not me, right? Well, wait a minute. Compared to most of the world, everybody in here is that way, so far as I know. I could be wrong, but so far as I know, everybody in here would be classified as wealthy compared to most of the world. So perhaps we ought to rethink some of these passages about being in reference to others than not us, especially with regard to the wealthy. You have your hand up? Sorry.
I kind of disagree.
Okay.
Both of those are negatives. I mean, the wealth of the rich is their fortress. That means that they're just relying on their money. And the poverty of the poor and their ruin, that's just, I don't have money. So it's so terrible for me.
Okay.
It seems mediocre to live like that.
Okay. And I guess the way that you answer the question is whether you think this idea goes along with the positive evaluation of wealth you see elsewhere in Proverbs, or the reality that it's not the most important thing elsewhere in Proverbs. I guess it really depends on which side of the coin you go with this particular verse. I said pay attention to the parallelism because to me it appears to be antithetical parallelism, which if you remember, the wealth of the rich is their fortress, but the poverty of the poor is their ruin. There's no but there, though. So, it's also possible that it's that way on purpose, that the author wants us to explore how the first part can be both positive and negative. I mean, of course, there's no doubt about the second one, but the first can be true in both ways, right? So I can see that, absolutely. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah, that's a good point. How might that change it? Well, again, it depends. He could probably view it from both perspectives, right? Yeah.
Maybe he was showing the extremes of the economic situation. You have the riches providing a fortress for the people who are wealthy, and you have the poverty providing the ruin for the poor, showing the two extremes.
Okay. Yep. Could be. Yeah.
I think it also depends on how you internally view those riches, because I can make wealth and poverty, I can make it both happy and sad in either situation, and I can think of ways that it can be. I can think of the wealthiest people in the world that are the most miserable. I can think of the
Right.
wealthiest people in the world that are happiest. I can also do the same thing with poverty.
Right.
It all, I think, boils down to what our attitude is toward that wealth and our dependency upon that wealth. Because
Right.
I can think of times when we didn't have a whole lot of money, when we were the happiest, and I can think of times when we did have money that we were also the
Right.
happiest. So
Yep.
I really think it boils down to your dependency and how you think of the wealth and how you put emphasis on the wealth.
Okay. Yep. Right. Good. Good. Yeah.
I think if you look at the verse immediately preceding this and the one immediately following it, it changes the perception a little bit. Because it's obvious when you see the three verses, there's a parallelism, and it's talking about the wise or the wealthy person in the first half, and then the fool in the second half.
Okay.
So in verse 14 it says, the wise store up knowledge. And then in this verse, the wealth of rich is their fortress.
Mm-hmm.
Something they store it up. And then in the verse following it says, the wages of the righteous
Okay, yeah. Right. I think that's a good comment as well. And to be completely honest, it's sometimes easy to forget the verses that go before and after because a lot of times the topics are very much spread out. But I think that's a good idea as well. And it could have something to do with how they got their riches, and of course we're about to go in that direction. Thank you. That's a good comment. Yeah, sorry.
I think kind of when interpreting what you think he means, you have to look at his intended audience as well, because for the most part, he'd be writing to people that were in positions of power, that were in position of wealth. And so, seeing this fortress imagery, you would see someone who would be writing that to someone that would see a fortress as a place of security and a place of safety, and so it would be more of a positive thing to that intended audience at that time. Change as compared to what we talk about.
Okay. I think that's a valid point as well, is that, yeah, I mean, who is going to be reading this? Well, people that can read. And I know that sounds obvious, but no, what I mean is you've already limited the population significantly. And of course, if they can read, it means they have education. It probably means they have wealth as well. So yeah, I think that's a very good point that we should keep in mind. All right. This is going a lot slower than I thought it would, and that's why at the very beginning I said maybe we'll get through. Not looking like it now. Anyway, okay. So this is I've probably said this a million times, either in here or in classes at FC, but I don't think there's a whole lot of humor in the Bible, but this is one of them, I think. Proverbs 26:13. The lazy person says, "There's a lion in the road. There's a lion in the road," or in the streets. As a door turns on its hinges, so does a lazy person in bed. A lazy person buries a hand in the dish and is too tired to bring it back to the mouth. Okay. So what's verse 13 about? I mean, I think, well, I don't want to assume too much, but what do you think that's about? Yeah. Absolutely. Making excuses. There's a lion in the street, can't go to work today. I can't go out and do anything productive. Probably a lion out there. How likely do you think there was a lion in the road? I mean, lions were in ancient Israel, but probably not very likely. So it's absolutely about excuses, right? It's so easy to make excuses. This is a ridiculous excuse, and I think it's to help us think about our own excuses. Do we ever make ridiculous excuses? Well, I don't, but you all might. But no, of course we do. And so again, it has to do with laziness. What's verse 14 mean? Yeah.
Slothfulness,
Right.
what comes to mind.
But what about the image? What is the image? All right, the door turns on its hinges. How often does that happen? Well, it depends on if you think, I think it means the door is opening and closing, right? So this happens a lot, okay? Or maybe not. What?
It doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, I think that's part of it too. It's just one direction, right? Back and forth in bed. Good. I think that's it. And then 15, I think, is another ridiculous image that he's eating, but he's too lazy to even bring it back to the mouth. So, what do you think Proverbs has to say about laziness? It's not good. There are a lot of things that you can correct. Laziness is one of those that, for young people especially, must be corrected, right? And I think, do you think now, and I'll just ask you, this is just a question I'm not even sure I know the answer to. You're not supposed to do that when you teach a class, by the way, but here goes. Do you think our society has gotten lazier or not? Now, I know our first reaction is absolutely. But aren't we working harder than ever? Aren't we working more hours than ever? How can we say that we're lazier? People are working more hours now than probably ever. People are trying to work more efficiently now than probably ever. How can we say we're lazier now? What do you think? Yeah.
I think part of that is greed, that you get more money if you work more. And like the shopping thing where you just call and they bring the groceries out to your car, I think that's a lazy thing to do myself. But, you know, a lot of people do that. I don't think anything is bad about that. But a lot of things makes us lazier than people have been in the past.
Is it, well, and see, that's the question, is it's not marketed as lazier, right? Like Walmart doesn't say in their ad campaign, are you lazy? Are you too lazy to get out of your car? Just pull in the parking lot, we'll bring it out to you, right? They're not going to do that. It's more efficient, right? It's efficiency. And for some people, I'll defend those people a little bit because I've done it before. So it's not my idea, not my idea. But had kids in the car.
It doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. Go to the store.
Okay, all right. I'll probably do it again. Sorry, but probably do it again. But yeah, so it could be efficient. But again, it's back to this question: aren't we busier? Yeah.
Do you think a part of it is always wanting to get the quick way out of a situation? Not really putting the effort, but trying
Absolutely.
to get the fast way out.
Yep, absolutely. That's not the same thing as working hard. Working hard and trying to get things done in the quickest fashion, absolutely not the same. Some things, frankly, just take time. And you're right, a lot of people aren't willing to put the time in. And that is a difference. And I guess, again, it comes back to an individual perspective. And so Proverbs is asking us today, which are we? I mean, we may be going to work all day, we may be doing all these things, but are we really working? I mean, do people have to work so many more hours because they're wasting their work time on social media, and so they got to work all these extra hours to make up for it? I mean, that's just a rhetorical question. I don't know for sure. I would assume in some cases that's absolutely the reason. But I don't know about percentages. It's probably impossible to know. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Back in the early 1900s, they'd be going to a factory every day. Now, a lot of people are working freelancing. They're working
Yep.
computers in their house.
Right.
They are working a lot of hours, but they get to do it in the comfort of their home.
Yeah. And they can do so in their pajamas all day, right? Does that mean they're lazy? If you wear your pajamas all day doing work, does that mean you're like, well, I don't, again, I mean, it depends, right? But what is unambiguous is the Proverbs writer's view of laziness. There's no question about it. And so the reason I bring up that question about modernity and whether our current society is more lazy is because it may be a little more difficult to define now. I mean, in ancient Israel, if you're not out in, if it's an agricultural environment and you're not out in the field and you're staying in bed asleep, well, that's pretty obvious, right? Now it's not so obvious as you all have brought up. Yeah.
You see them in Walmart in pajamas all day.
Man, Walmart just keeps coming up, doesn't it? I don't know. I don't like Walmart, so I don't think we should talk about Walmart in this class anymore. So that's partially my fault. Okay. Chapter 10, 3 through 5. The Lord does not let the righteous go hungry, but he thwarts the craving of the wicked. A slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. A child who gathers in summer is prudent, but a child who sleeps in harvest brings shame. Verse 5 points to another principle that we'll see later on, and that is there is a prudent way to gain riches, and that is commended. There are also wrong ways to do it, okay? But verse 3 says that the wicked will not be satisfied, essentially. And of course, the opposite of that is the righteous won't go hungry. Now, again, are there occasions where that's not the case? And yes, the answer is yes. All right? 21:17. Whoever loves pleasure will suffer want. Whoever loves wine and oil will not be rich. Again, pointing to the principle that there is a wrong way to approach riches. 22:16, oppressing the poor in order to enrich oneself, and giving to the rich will lead only to loss. Proverbs 22:16 is awfully important for so many reasons, but especially in regard to this overall topic, that if you get rich this way, by oppressing the poor and then giving what you get from them to other rich people, why would you do that, by the way?
They love to be used.
Right? Exactly, to influence them to essentially side with you. And why would you give money to the rich instead of the poor anyway? Yeah, exactly. Buying favor. You want them to help you. They're in a position of power. These poor people aren't, right? And that's why the Bible constantly exhorts followers of God to give to these people that can't help you in any way, right? God in the Old Testament is frequently said to be a father to the orphaned and one who looks after widows. Why mention those two groups? Because they can't do anything for anybody. In terms of a social position of power, they have none. Those are the people God looks after. He looks after even those. So, of course, what should human beings do? They should look after those people. They can't help them. And that is so paradoxical to the way we normally think, right? We normally want to do, we human beings, normally want to help those who can help us, right? Well, you can think about a social situation where somebody's there that may influence your career, and then there are other people there who have nothing to do with it whatsoever. Who are you going to talk to? Again, being just a normal, whatever that is, normal human being. Well, you're going to talk to the person that influences, right? Well, that's what this is about. Of course, this is further than that, because this means you're taking advantage of the poor to essentially get what you want. Reputation, fame, support from the rich, etc. Okay? So again, the point is, foolish behavior, even if it leads to wealth, will be punished. Anything else about that? Yeah.
My Bible says, instead of the word and, mine says all, O-R.
It says what?
O-R, give all, or giving to the rich.
Oh, so oppressing the poor in order to enrich for himself or giving to the rich? Okay. Interesting. Well, hold on a second. This is some major development here. Yours says or. Well, hold on. We got to settle this first, or try to anyway. Neither's there. So that's. It just says oppressing the poor in order to enrich oneself, giving to the rich. That's all it says. There's no and, there's no or. So it's a translation supplement because there's nothing there. That's interesting. I'll have to look at that in more detail. The point is that yes, there's a wrong way to gain riches. And so this expands our picture, as I said at the very beginning, that it's not so simple as sometimes people make it out, even today. All right? And of course, we'll explore this issue much more in the future. Thank you.